"You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house." They thought he couldn't hear. They thought he couldn't see. The powerful Korean CEO who'd built an empire from nothing now sat motionless in his wheelchair, staring at nothing. His body had been broken for 3 years. His spirit, they assumed, had died long ago. But young T was watching everything. His fingers gripped the armrests of his wheelchair when his wife's voice cut through the mansion like a blade, sharp, cold, final. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sarah," Minji said, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor as she circled the older woman like a predator. "You're too old, too slow. Frankly, you're an eyesore in my home." Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the handle of her worn suitcase. At 63, she'd given decades of her life to this family. She'd raised their children. She'd held young T's hand through his darkest nights after the accident. And now, with tears streaming down her weathered face, she was being thrown out like yesterday's trash. In the corner of that grand living room, in that expensive wheelchair that had become both his prison and his disguise, young T felt something inside him snap. His knuckles turned white. His jaw clenched. His legs, the legs everyone believed were dead, began to tremble with suppressed rage. Because behind those seemingly vacant eyes, a dragon was waking up. And he'd been waiting 3 long years for this exact moment. The moment when his wife would finally reveal who she truly was. The moment when loyalty would be tested. The moment when the silent observer would become the avenging force. But there was one problem with Minji's plan. She forgot that even wounded dragons still have teeth. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone be treated cruelly and wished you could do something about it? Have you ever felt powerless in the face of injustice? Because what's about to happen in this mansion will restore your faith that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 2 in the afternoon when Minji made her announcement. The sound echoed through the T mansion like a death knell, each chime punctuating the cruelty of what was about to happen. "1 hour, Sarah," Minji said, examining her perfectly manicured nails as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. "That's more than generous for someone who should have been put out to pasture years ago." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to diminish, to erase decades of devotion with a single cruel decree. "Ma'am, please," Sarah's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "I've served this family for 22 years. I've cared for Mr. T since the accident. I've—" "Cared for him?" Minji laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "Is that what you call shuffling around at a snail's pace? Dropping things? Making this house look like a retirement home?" She stepped closer, invading Sarah's space with practiced intimidation. "Look at you. You can barely stand straight. Your hands shake when you pour tea. You're slow, you're unsightly, and frankly, you make my guests uncomfortable." The lies rolled off Minji's tongue with practiced ease. Sarah's hands didn't shake unless she was upset. She never dropped anything. She was as capable as she'd been a decade ago. But Minji didn't care about truth. She cared about control. "I'm bringing in younger staff," Minji continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "People who can actually keep up with the demands of running a household of this caliber. You understand, don't you? It's nothing personal. Just business." Everything about it was personal. Every word was a calculated strike. 1 hour, Minji repeated, checking the diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist. "The clock starts now. And Sarah?" She turned back, her smile venomous. "Don't even think about saying goodbye to my husband. He doesn't need you hovering over him anymore. That's what I'm hiring the new staff for." Sarah stood frozen as Minji's heels clicked away down the corridor, each step a countdown to her exile. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Not yet, not while she could still be seen. From his position in the corner of the room, Young T watched it all unfold. To anyone looking at him, he was the same broken man he'd been for 3 years. His face remained impassive, his body still, his eyes unfocused and distant. The perfect picture of a man trapped in his own ruined body, but inside a storm was raging. His mind drifted backward, pulled by the current of memory to nights Minji would rather he forget. Nights when the mansion had pulsed with music and laughter while he lay alone in his room, his body screaming with pain, his mind clouded with medications he never asked for. It was Sarah who had been there. Always Sarah. He remembered the first night after the accident, when consciousness had returned like shards of broken glass cutting through his mind. The pain had been unbearable. He'd woken screaming, and it was Sarah's face that swam into focus above him, her gentle hands holding his, her voice steady and calm. "You're safe, Mr. T," she'd whispered. "I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." Where had Minji been that night? At a charity gala, he'd later learned, wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, drinking champagne while her husband fought to remember his own name. The memories came faster now, sharper. Sarah bringing him water at 3 a.m. when the medications made his throat burn. Sarah reading him news about his company when he couldn't hold a tablet. Sarah sitting beside his bed during the thunderstorms because she knew they reminded him of the night of the accident. And Minji. Minji had been at spa retreats, shopping trips to Paris, private dinners with business associates whose names young T never quite caught. He remembered the night 6 months ago when he'd woken to Sarah gently massaging his legs, tears streaming down her face. "I won't give up on you," she'd whispered, not knowing he could hear her. "Everyone else has, but I won't. You're still in there, Mr. T. I know you are." She'd been right. He was still there, and he was watching everything. Upstairs, in the small room off the servants' quarters that had been her home for over 2 decades, Sarah moved through the motions of packing with mechanical precision. Her belongings fit easily into one suitcase and a cardboard box. 22 years of life reduced to so little. She folded her spare uniforms, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced ahead to an uncertain future. Where would she go? She had a sister in New Jersey, but they hadn't spoken in years. She had some savings, but not enough to retire on. At her age, finding new employment would be nearly impossible. But those weren't the thoughts that made her hands finally start to shake. It was the fear of what would happen to young T without her there to protect him. She opened her nightstand drawer to find a photograph she'd kept hidden beneath old receipts and prayer cards. The image showed young T from 5 years ago, before the accident, standing in the mansion's garden with the sun behind him, his smile genuine and bright. He'd been giving a speech at a company event, and Sarah had snapped the photo from the back of the crowd because something about that moment had felt important to preserve. The man in that photograph looked nothing like the hollow shell everyone believed him to be now. That man had been fierce, brilliant, unstoppable. That man had built an empire from nothing, had provided jobs for thousands, had been feared and respected in equal measure. And now he sat, helpless while his wife dismantled everything he'd built, piece by piece. Sarah clutched the photograph to her chest and finally let the tears come. They fell hot and fast, years of suppressed grief pouring out in the privacy of her small room. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the photograph, to the man he'd been, to the man trapped inside the broken body downstairs. "I tried, God knows I tried, but I failed you." The weight of that failure crushed her, because she knew things that no one else knew. She'd seen things that no one else had seen. And now, forced to leave, she wouldn't be there to stop what was coming. Her mind pulled her back 3 weeks, to the moment everything had changed. It had been a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah remembered that detail clearly because Tuesdays were when Minji had her standing massage appointment at the spa. She'd left her Hermes purse on the entrance hall table, and when Sarah had moved it to clean, something had fallen out. A small glass vial. Pharmaceutical, with a label Sarah recognized immediately. Lorazepam, a powerful sedative. But this vial hadn't come from Young T's neurologist. The pharmacy name was different. The prescribing doctor was someone Sarah had never heard of, and the dosage was wrong. All wrong. Sarah's nursing training from decades ago might have been outdated, but she remembered enough to know that the amounts listed on that vial were dangerously high, far higher than what Dr. Chen had prescribed for Young T's recovery protocol. Her hands had trembled as she'd photographed the label with her old phone, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Then she'd carefully returned the vial to Minji's purse exactly as she'd found it. That night, Sarah had done something she'd never done before. She'd stolen one of Young T's prescribed pills from his medication organizer and compared it to what Minji had been personally administering during her caring wife routine each morning. They weren't the same. The size was different, the color slightly off. The manufacturer's stamp didn't match. Minji wasn't giving her husband his prescribed medication. She was substituting it with something else, something stronger, something designed to keep him docile, confused, trapped in a fog so thick he could never find his way out. The realization had hit Sarah like ice water. Minji wasn't just neglectful. She wasn't just cruel. She was actively poisoning her husband, keeping him dependent, keeping him helpless, keeping him from ever reclaiming the power she now wielded in his name. And that's when Sarah had made her decision, a decision that could have cost her everything, that had cost her everything, but was the only choice her conscience would allow. She'd started the swap 3 weeks ago. Every morning, she'd pretend to help Minji with the medication routine, watching carefully as Minji prepared the morning doses. Then, when Minji left the room, Sarah would switch them. The sedatives went into the trash, ground up and flushed. In their place, she gave Young T the actual prescriptions Dr. Chen had ordered, along with high-potency vitamin supplements she'd bought with her own money from the pharmacy downtown. The first week, nothing had changed. Young T remained as he'd been, locked inside himself. The second week, Sarah had noticed something, a flicker in his eyes when she spoke to him, a slight tension in his jaw when Minji entered the room. Small things, barely perceptible, but present nonetheless. By the third week, Sarah had been certain. Young T was coming back. The fog was lifting. His eyes tracked movement now. His fingers would occasionally curl when he was thinking. Once, when Sarah had whispered a question about whether he wanted the window open, she'd seen his head move in the smallest nod. He was waking up, and Minji couldn't know. If Minji discovered what Sarah had done, that Young T was regaining awareness, Sarah didn't want to think about what might happen. But Sarah had made a mistake. She'd gotten sloppy, too confident. She'd left her phone out one day, the photograph of the suspicious vial still visible on the screen. Minji must have seen it, must have realized the threat Sarah posed. That's why this was happening now. Not because Sarah was too old or too slow, but because Sarah knew too much. Sarah folded the photograph of Young T carefully and tucked it into her pocket, close to her heart. She zipped up her suitcase and picked up her small cardboard box of personal items. Through her small window, she could see the gardens where she'd spent countless mornings tending to the flowers Young T had once loved. She took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary, her home, her entire world for so long. The worn carpet, the simple wooden cross on the wall, the reading lamp that never gave quite enough light. She'd been happy here once. She'd felt useful, needed, important. Now she was just an old woman with a suitcase and nowhere to go. But as Sarah descended the servants' staircase for the last time, one thought burned bright in her mind through the grief and fear. Young T was awake. He was aware. And whatever happened to her now, she'd given him that gift. The gift of clarity, the gift of truth, the gift of a fighting chance. She just prayed he'd be strong enough to use it. Sarah had hoped to slip out through the service entrance, to spare herself one final humiliation. But Minji had other plans. The main foyer had been transformed into a stage, and Minji was determined to put on a show. She'd gathered the household staff, the cook, the gardener, the two younger housekeepers, and positioned them like an audience. They stood in an uncomfortable semicircle, eyes downcast, trapped between loyalty to Sarah and fear of their employer. "There she is," Minji announced as Sarah appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her worn suitcase in one hand, her cardboard box tucked under her other arm. "Our dear Sarah, finally leaving us after all these years." The false warmth in Minji's voice made Sarah's skin crawl. This wasn't a farewell. This was a public execution. Sarah descended the stairs slowly, carefully, willing herself not to stumble under the weight of everyone's stares. She could feel their pity radiating toward her like heat, and it burned worse than Minji's cruelty ever could. "I want everyone to see this," Minji continued, positioning herself at the base of the stairs like a barrier. "To understand what happens when people outlive their usefulness in this household. Sarah here thought she was indispensable, thought she was family." Minji's laugh was crystalline and cold. "But family doesn't get paid minimum wage, do they?" The cook, Mrs. Park, made a small sound of distress. Minji's head snapped toward her. "Something to say, Mrs. Park?" "No, ma'am," Mrs. Park whispered, her face flushing. "Good, because you'd hate to be next, wouldn't you?" Minji turned back to Sarah, who had reached the bottom of the staircase. "Now, Sarah, before you go, I think you owe everyone an apology." Sarah's breath caught. "An apology? For being such a burden, for making everyone work around your limitations, for cluttering up this beautiful home with your decrepit presence." Minji's smile widened. "Go on. Apologize." In the corner of the foyer, positioned where he could see everything, young T sat in his wheelchair. To the gathered staff, he was invisible, a permanent fixture they'd learned to look past. But his hands had begun to tremble. The trembling spread up his arms, into his shoulders, down through his torso to his legs. Legs that hadn't moved in 3 years. Legs that everyone believed were dead, except they weren't. Not anymore. "I won't apologize," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her weathered face. "I've given this family everything I had. I've done nothing wrong." Minji's expression transformed from theatrical cruelty to genuine rage. The mask slipped, revealing the monster beneath. "You won't?" Minji took a step forward, invading Sarah's space. "You think you have a choice here? You think you have any power in this house?" She grabbed the suitcase from Sarah's hand and hurled it across the marble floor. It skidded into the wall with a crash, the latches breaking open, Sarah's meager belongings spilling across the expensive tile. "Ma'am, please," the younger housekeeper, Meeson, started to say. "Shut up," Minji snapped. She turned back to Sarah, her face twisted with fury. "You've been poisoning my husband against me, I know you have," whispering in his ear, filling his head with lies about me. "I've never— Don't lie to me." Minji's hand shot out and grabbed Sarah's arm, her manicured nails digging into the older woman's flesh through her thin uniform sleeve. "You think I don't know what you've been doing? Sneaking around, watching me, judging. Me!" "Let go of me," Sarah said, her voice stronger now, decades of suppressed anger finally surfacing. "You have no right." "I have every right," Minji shrieked. "This is my house, my empire, and you are nothing." She shoved Sarah backward with both hands. Hard. Sarah stumbled, her feet tangling, her balance failing. The cardboard box flew from her arms, its contents scattering. Photographs, letters, a small jewelry box that had belonged to her mother. Everything precious, everything personal, now strewn across the floor like garbage. Sarah fell. Her hip hit the floor first, sending a lightning bolt of pain through her body. Her head followed, cracking against the marble with a sickening sound that made Mrs. Park cry out. "Get out!" Minji screamed, standing over Sarah's crumpled form. "Get out of my house, you old hag. You useless, pathetic—" Do not touch her. The voice cut through the foyer like a blade through silk, deep, commanding, unmistakable. Minji froze mid-rant, her mouth hanging open. The staff members gasped in unison. Mrs. Park's hand flew to her mouth. Even Sarah, dazed and hurting on the floor, turned her head toward the source of that voice. Young T's wheelchair sat empty. He stood behind it, both hands gripping the back of the chair for support, his legs shaking with the effort of bearing weight they hadn't borne in 3 years. His face was pale, covered in a sheen of sweat, but his eyes burned with an intensity that had been absent for so long everyone had forgotten what it looked like. Young T? Minji's voice came out as barely a whisper. You can't walk? Young T finished for her, his voice rough from disuse but growing stronger with each word. I've been walking for 2 weeks, Minji. Not far, not well, but enough. He took one shaky step away from the chair, then another. His gait was unsteady, his muscles protesting every movement, but he moved forward with pure determination. I've been waiting to see if you had even a shred of humanity left in you. The foyer had gone deathly silent. No one dared breathe. Young T took another step, then another, each one more confident than the last. The physical therapy he'd been doing in secret, alone in his room during the hours when everyone thought he was sleeping, was paying off now. His body remembered. His muscles responded. He was reclaiming what had been stolen from him. Minji backed away, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and then mounting fear as the implications crashed down on her. How long? How long have you been able to? Long enough, Young T said, reaching Sarah. He knelt beside her with difficulty, his movements careful and deliberate, and offered his hand. Long enough to hear everything, see everything, know everything. Sarah stared up at him, tears streaming freely now, but these were different tears. Not tears of grief or humiliation, but of relief and wonder. She took his hand, his strong, steady hand, and let him help her to her feet. Mr. T, she whispered. I'm here, he said softly, for her ears only. Thanks to you. Then he turned to face his wife, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Minji, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing, who had commanded boardrooms and crushed competitors, who had once been feared and respected in equal measure. You're fired. What? Minji's laugh was high-pitched, hysterical. You can't fire me. I'm your wife. A wife who's been embezzling from my company for 3 years. Young T's words fell like hammer blows. A wife who's been drugging me to keep me compliant. A wife who just committed assault in front of 6 witnesses. He looked around at the assembled staff, meeting each of their eyes. You all saw it, didn't you? They nodded one by one. Even in their fear, they couldn't deny the truth of what they'd witnessed. You have 1 hour to pack your personal belongings, Young T continued. Anything you bought with embezzled funds stays here. My lawyers will contact you within the week to begin divorce proceedings. And, Minji? He took a step closer to her, his presence towering despite his weakened state. If you ever come near Sarah again, if you ever set foot on this property again, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison for attempted murder. Do you understand me? Minji's face had gone white, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Rage, fear, humiliation, desperation. You can't prove any of this, she spat. You're still weak. You're still sick. No one will believe. I have records, Sarah said quietly, reaching into her uniform pocket and pulling out her old phone. Photographs of the vials, timestamps, everything. She looked at Young T. I was going to take it to the police. I just needed to be sure first. Young T smiled at her, a real smile, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd shown in 3 years. You were protecting me, even when it cost you everything. Security is on their way, Mrs. Park announced, her own phone in her hand. Her voice shook but held firm. I called them when you pushed Sarah, Mrs. T. Or should I say, former Mrs. T. 2 security guards appeared at the entrance within minutes. They were the same men who'd been working the estate for years, who remembered young T from before the accident, who'd watched him waste away under his wife's care. Their expressions hardened as they took in the scene, their employer standing on his own 2 feet, Sarah disheveled and hurt on the floor, Minji caught in her own web of lies. Escort Mrs. T to her rooms, young T ordered. Make sure she only takes what's legally hers. Then escort her off the property. Minji opened her mouth to protest, but the fight had drained out of her. She'd been caught, exposed, defeated. As the security guards moved to flank her, she shot one last venomous look at Sarah. This isn't over, she hissed. Yes, young T said firmly. It is. They watched in silence as Minji was led away, her designer heels clicking against the marble for the last time. When the sound finally faded, young T turned to the gathered staff. Thank you, he said simply. All of you, for your loyalty, for your courage, for staying when I'm sure it wasn't easy. His voice grew stronger, more certain. There will be changes around here, good changes, but first, I need to make something right. He turned to Sarah, who was still clutching her phone, surrounded by her scattered belongings. Mrs. Park and Misun had already begun gathering them up, treating each item with the reverence it deserved. Sarah, young T said, and his voice was gentle now, the hardness replaced with something that looked like gratitude mixed with sorrow. I heard everything you said to me, every whispered prayer, every word of encouragement, every time you told me not to give up. He paused, emotion thick in his throat. You saved my life, not just by switching the medication, but by believing I was still worth saving when everyone else had written me off. Mr. T, let me finish, he said, holding up a hand. I'm offering you a position, not as a maid, not as a nurse, but as the head of household operations, full executive authority over all domestic matters, a salary that reflects your actual value to this family. And Sarah? He reached out and took her weathered hand in his. A lifetime contract, not because I need you to work, but because this is your home. You are family. You've always been family. I'm just sorry it took me so long to show it. Sarah's tears fell freely now, but she was smiling through them, a smile that transformed her tired face into something radiant. I don't need a fancy title, Mr. T, she said softly. I just need to know you're safe. We'll keep each other safe, young T replied. Deal? Deal. He pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of her bruised hip and his still recovering body. Behind them, the staff applauded softly, and Mrs. Park was openly weeping with joy. When they finally pulled apart, young T looked around at his home, truly seeing it for the first time in 3 years. The marble floors that caught the afternoon light, the paintings on the walls he'd selected himself before the accident, the staircase where his children had once run up and down, laughing and free. It was time to reclaim all of it, his home, his company, his life. But first, he had a phone call to make to his lawyers, then another to his doctor, and then several dozen to his board of directors, who were going to be very surprised to hear from him. The dragon wasn't just awake, he was ready to breathe fire, and this time he had an army of loyal allies standing with him,